Hello again. We're here again to read two more stories written by Beatrice Potter. This first story it's got two titles. It's called The Tale of Samuel Whiskers, or the other title is The Roly-Poly Pudding. And look, it's about a mouse. I think that must be Samuel Whiskers, don't you? Once upon a time, there was an old cat called Mrs. Tabitha Twitchit, who was an anxious parent. She used to lose her kittens continually, and whenever they were lost, they were always in mischief. On baking day, she determined to shut them up in a cupboard. Oh, so she decided that was the best thing. She caught Moppet and Mittens, but she could not find Tom. Mrs. Tabitha went up and down all over the house, mewing for Tom Kitten. She looked in the pantry, under the staircase, and she searched the best spare bedroom that was all covered up with dust sheets. She went right upstairs and looked into the attics, but she could not find him anywhere. So here she is, look, mewing along, wanting to find Tom. The attic is a little room right at the top of the house. You might have one in your house. It was an old house, full of cupboards and passages. Some of the walls were 4 feet thick, and there used to be queer noises inside them, as if there might be a little secret staircase. Certainly there were odd little jagged doorways in the wainscot, and things disappeared at night, especially cheese and bacon. Mrs. Tabitha became more and more distracted and mewed dreadfully. While their mother was searching the house, Moppet and Mittens got into mischief. The cupboard door was not locked, so they pushed it open and came out. There they are. They went straight to the dough, which was set to rise in a pan before the fire. They patted it with their little soft paws. "Shall we make dear little muffins?" said Mittens to Moppet. But just at that moment somebody knocked at the front door, and Moppet jumped into the flour barrel in a fright. Oh, goodness. It's a flour barrel. Mittens ran away to the dairy and hid in an empty jar on the stone shelf where the milk pans stand. Now, remember, this is a long time ago, and these things used to be in pantries and in the houses of the old days. The visitor was a neighbour, Mrs. Ribby. She had called to borrow some yeast. Oh, look, she looks quite posh, doesn't she? All wrapped up. Beautiful. Mrs. Tabitha came downstairs, mewing dreadfully. "Come in, Cousin Ribby, come in and sit you down. I'm in sad trouble, Cousin Ribby," said Tabitha, shedding tears. "I've lost my dear son Thomas. I'm afraid the rats have got him." She wiped her eyes with her apron. "He's a bad kitten, Cousin Tabitha. He made a cat's cradle of my best bonnet last time I came to tea. Where have you looked for him?" "All over the house. The rats are too many for me. What a thing it is to have an unruly family," said Mrs. Tabitha Twitchit. "I'm not afraid of rats. I will help you find him and whip him too. What is all that soot in the fender?" The fender is part of the fireplace. "The chimney wants sweeping. Oh dear me, Cousin Ribby, now Moppet and Mittens have gone. They have both got out of the cupboard." Oh, look, she is upset. So upset. Ribby and Tabitha set to work to search the house thoroughly again. They poked under the beds with Ribby's umbrella, and they rummaged in cupboards. They even fetched a candle and looked inside a clothes chest in one of the attics. They could not find anything, but once they heard a door bang and somebody scuttered downstairs. So there they are looking into that was a clothes chest in the attic. Yes, it is infected with rats, said Tabitha tearfully. I caught 7 young ones out of one hole in the back kitchen, and we had them for dinner last Saturday. And once I saw the old father rat, an enormous old rat, Cousin Ribby. I was just going to jump upon him when he showed his yellow teeth at me and whisked down the hole. The rats get upon my nerves, Cousin Ribby. Oh, sorry, the rats get upon my nerves, Cousin Ribby, said Tabitha. Ribby and Tabitha searched and searched. They both heard a curious roly-poly noise under the attic floor, but there was nothing to be seen. They returned to the kitchen. Here's one of your kittens at least, said Ribby, dragging Moppet out of the flour barrel. They shook the flour off her and set her down on the kitchen floor. She seemed to be in a terrible fright. Oh, mother, mother, said Moppet, there's been an old woman rat in the kitchen and she's stolen some dough. Oh, look, there's a picture of there, look. There. The two cats ran to look at the dough pan. Sure enough, there were little marks of little scratching fingers, and a lump of dough was gone. Which way did she go, Moppet? But Moppet was too frightened to peep out of the barrel again. Ribby and Tabitha took her with them to keep her safely in sight while they went on with their search. They went into the dairy. The first thing they found was Mittens hiding in an empty jar. They tipped up the jar and she scrambled out. Oh, mother, mother, said Mittens. Oh, she does look frightened, look. Oh, mother, mother, there was an old man rat in the dairy, a dreadful, enormous big rat, mother, and he's stolen a pat of butter and the rolling pin. Ribby and Tabitha looked at one another. A rolling pin and butter? Oh, my poor son Thomas, exclaimed Tabitha, wringing her paws. A rolling pin, said Ribby. Did we not hear a roly-poly noise in the attic when we were looking into that chest? There, look. Ribby and Tabitha rushed upstairs again. Sure enough, the roly-poly noise was still going on quite distinctly under the attic floor. This is serious, Cousin Tabitha, said Ribby. We must send for John Joiner at once, with a saw. Now look who John Joiner is. It's a little dog. Very sweet little dog. Now, this was what had been happening to Tom Kitten, and it shows how very unwise it is to go up a chimney in a very old house, where a person does not know his way and where there are enormous rats. Tom Kitten did not want to be shut up in the cupboard. When he saw that his mother was going to bake, he determined to hide. He looked about for a nice convenient place, and he fixed upon the chimney. The fire had only just been lighted, and it was not hot, but there was a white choky smoke from the green sticks. Tom Kitten got upon the fender and looked up. It was a big old-fashioned fireplace. Now, look at this, a very big old-fashioned fireplace, and when I was a little girl, I lived in a house with a bit of a fireplace like that, with an oven at the side, and very old-fashioned. The chimney itself was wide enough inside for a man to stand up and walk about, so there was plenty of room for a little tomcat. He jumped right up into the fireplace, balancing himself upon the iron bar where the kettle hangs. Tom Kitten took another big jump off the bar and landed on a ledge high up inside the chimney, knocking down some soot into the fender. Oh, my goodness. Tom Kitten coughed and choked with the smoke, and he could hear the sticks beginning to crackle and burn in the fireplace down below. He made up his mind to climb right to the top and get out on the slates and try to catch sparrows. I cannot go back. If I slipped, I might fall in the fire and singe my beautiful tail and my little blue jacket. So there he is inside the fireplace. The chimney was a very big old-fashioned one. It was built in the days when people burnt logs of wood upon the hearth. The chimney stack stood up above the roof like a little stone tower, and the daylight shone down from the top under the slanting slates that kept out the rain. There, you can see the chimney. Tom Kitten was getting very frightened. He climbed up and up and up. Look at him. Goodness me, he's got himself into a real fix there. Then he waded sideways through inches of soot. He was like a little sweep himself. It was most confusing in the dark. One flue seemed to lead into another. There was less smoke, but Tom Kitten felt quite lost. Oh dear. A flue is a part of a chimney. And there must have been several because there were probably several chimneys in that house. He scrambled up and up, but before he reached the chimney top, he came to a place where somebody had loosened a stone in the wall. There were some mutton bones lying about. This seems funny, said Tom Kitten. Who has been gnawing bones up here in the chimney? I wish I'd never come. And what a funny smell. It is something like mouse, only dreadfully strong. Makes me sneeze, said Tom Kitten. So there he is. He didn't like that place at all. He squeezed through the hole in the wall and dragged himself along a most uncomfortably tight passage where there was scarcely any light. He groped his way carefully for several yards. He was at the back of the skirting board in the attic, where there is a little mark in the picture, a little star sign. If you can just see that little star at the bottom there. And that's where he was. All at once, he fell head over heels in the dark down a hole and landed on a heap of very dirty rags. When Tom Kitten picked himself up and looked about him, he found himself in a place that he'd never seen before, although he had lived all his life in the house. Oh my goodness. Look. It was a very small, stuffy, fusty room with boards and rafters and cobwebs and lath and plaster. Oh. Opposite to him, as far away as he could sit, was an enormous rat. "What do you mean by tumbling into my bed all covered with smuts?" said the rat, chattering his teeth. Please, sir, the chimney wants sweeping," said poor Tom Kitten. Anna Maria, squeaked the rat. There was a pattering noise and an old woman rat poked her head around a rafter. So there. And there's the lady rat, look. In a minute she rushed upon Tom Kitten, and before he knew what was happening, oh, goodness me, look. She's chased him. Oh, my. His coat was pulled off, and he was rolled up in a bundle and tied with string in very hard knots. Anna Maria did the tying. The old rat watched her and took snuff. When she had finished, they both sat staring at him with their mouths open. "Anna Maria," said the old man rat, whose name was Samuel Whiskers, "Anna Maria, make me a kitten dumpling roly-poly pudding for my dinner." "It requires dough and a pat of butter and a rolling pin," said Anna Maria, considering Tom Kitten with her head on one side. "No," said Samuel Whiskers, "make it properly, Anna Maria, with breadcrumbs." Look, they've tied him up. Oh my, poor Tom Kitten. "Nonsense, butter and dough," replied Anna Maria. The two rats consulted together for a few minutes and then went away. Samuel Whiskers got through a hole in the wainscot, that's a skirting board, and went boldly down the front staircase to the dairy to get the butter. He did not meet anybody. He made a second journey for the rolling pin. He pushed it in front of him with his paws like a brewer's man trundling a barrel. He could hear Ribby and Tabitha talking, but they were busy lighting the candle to look into the chest. They did not see him. Look, there he is. Anna Maria went down by way of the skirting board and the window shutter to the kitchen to steal the dough. She borrowed a small saucer and scooped up the dough with her paws. She did not observe Moppet. Now you might just see Moppet's ears at the top of the barrel, sticking out. While Tom Kitten was left alone under the floor of the attic, he wriggled about and tried to mew for help. But his mouth was full of soot and cobwebs, and he was tied up in such very tight knots he could not make anybody hear him, except a spider, which came out of a crack in the ceiling and examined the knots critically from a safe distance. So there he is, and there's the spider having a look. It was a judge of knots because it had a habit of tying up unfortunate bluebottles. It did not offer to assist him. Tom Kitten wriggled and squirmed until he was quite exhausted. Presently the rats came back and set to work to make him into a dumpling. First they smeared him with butter, and then they rolled him in the dough. "Will not the string be very indigestible, Anna Maria?" inquired Samuel Whiskers. Anna Maria said she thought that it was of no consequence, but she wished that Tom Kitten would hold his head still, as it disarranged the pastry. She laid hold of his ears. Tom Kitten bit and spat and mewed and wriggled, and the rolling pin went roly-poly, roly-poly, roly-poly. The rats each held an end. "His tail is sticking out. You did not fetch enough dough, Anna Maria." "I fetched as much as I could carry," replied Anna Maria. "I do not think," said Samuel Whiskers, pausing to take a look at Tom Kitten, "I do not think it will be a good pudding. It smells sooty." Oh, look, putting it into a pudding. Oh, goodness. Anna Maria was about to argue the point when all at once there began to be other sounds up above. The rasping noise of a saw and the noise of a little dog scratching and yelping. The rats dropped the rolling pin and listened attentively. That means they would listen carefully. "We are discovered and interrupted, Anna Maria. Let us collect our property and other people's and depart at once. I fear that we shall be obliged to leave this pudding." "But I'm persuaded that the knots would have proved indigestible, whatever you may argue to the contrary. Come away at once, and help me to tie up some mutton bones in a counterpane, said Anna Maria. I've got half a smoked ham hidden in the chimney. Oh, goodness, so they're going to escape before the little dog gets through. So it happened that by the time John Joiner had got the plank up, there was nobody under the floor except the rolling pin and Tom Kitten in a very dirty dumpling. Oh, goodness, he was saved, hooray. But there was a strong smell of rats, and John Joiner spent the rest of the morning sniffing and whining and wagging his tail and going round and round with his head in the hole like a gimlet. Then he nailed the plank down again and put his tools in his bag and came downstairs. The cat family were quite recovered. They invited him to stay for dinner. The dumpling had been peeled off Tom Kitten and made separately into a bag pudding with currants in it to hide the smuts. They had been obliged to put Tom Kitten into a hot bath to get the butter off. Oh, look, there he is in the bath, being washed by his mum. John Joiner smelt the pudding, but he regretted that he had not time to stay to dinner, because he had just finished making a wheelbarrow for Miss Potter, and she had ordered 2 hen coops. And when I was going to the post late in the afternoon, I looked up the lane from the corner, and I saw Mr. Samuel Whiskers and his wife on the run, with big bundles on a little wheelbarrow, which looked very like mine. They were just turning in at the gate to the barn of Farmer Potatoes. Samuel Whiskers was huffing and out of breath. Maria was still arguing in shrill tones. She seemed to know her way, and she seemed to have a quantity of luggage. I am sure I never gave her leave to borrow my wheelbarrow. They went into the barn and hauled their parcels with a bit of string to the top of the haymow. So they went to the top of the haystack. This thing full of hay is called a haystack. After that, there were no more rats for a long time at Tabitha Twitchit's. I bet she was pleased. As for Farmer Potatoes, he had been driven nearly distracted. There were rats and rats and rats in his barn. They eat up the chicken food and steal the oats and bran and make holes in the meal bags. But he was cross. And they are all descended from Mr. and Mrs. Samuel Whiskers, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. There they are. There is no end to them. Moppet and Mittens have grown up into very good rat catchers. They go out rat catching in the village and they find plenty of enjoyment. They charge so much a dozen and they earn their living very comfortably. There, look, there's the rats and there's a cat looking at them. They hang up the rats' tails in a row on the barn door to show how many they've caught. Dozens and dozens of them. Oh, that's a bit gruesome, isn't it? We wouldn't do that these days. But Tom Kitten has always been afraid of a rat. He never durst face anything that is bigger than a mouse. So he's not frightened of a little mouse, but he's very frightened of a rat. that's the end. The end. So that was a funny story, wasn't it? Oh, this next story is the tale of the Flopsy Bunnies. Oh, that sounds nice. Wonder what they get up to. Shall we find out? It is said that the effect of eating too much lettuce is soporific. That means sends you to sleep. I have never felt sleepy after eating lettuces, but then I am not a rabbit. They certainly had a very soporific effect upon the Flopsy Bunnies. Oh, look, they're sweet. Been eating lettuce. When Benjamin Bunny grew up, he married his cousin Flopsy. They had a large family and they were very improvident and cheerful. I do not remember the separate names of their children. They were generally called the Flopsy Bunnies. But they had a happy time. As there was not always quite enough to eat, Benjamin used to borrow cabbages from Flopsy's brother, Peter Rabbit, who kept a nursery garden. Oh, now that's interesting, isn't it? Because Peter now has grown up and he keeps the garden. Can you see him in his blue jacket at the back of the picture? Sometimes Peter Rabbit had no cabbages to spare. When this happened, the Flopsy Bunnies went across the field to a rubbish heap in the ditch outside Mr. McGregor's garden. Mr. McGregor's rubbish heap was a mixture. There were jam pots and paper bags and mountains of chopped grass from the mowing machine, which always tasted oily, and some rotten vegetable marrows and an old boot or two. One day, oh joy, there was a quantity of overgrown lettuces that had shot into flower. So they really, you couldn't eat them. Well, we couldn't eat them, but I think the bunnies did. The Flopsy Bunnies simply stuffed lettuces. By degrees, one after the other, they became overcome with slumber and lay down in the mowed grass. Oh, look, there they are munching. Benjamin was not so much overcome as his children. Before going to sleep, he was sufficiently wide awake to put a paper bag over his head to keep off the flies. The little Flopsy Bunnies slept delightfully in the warm sun. From the garden behind from the lawn behind the garden came a distant clackety sound of the mowing machine. The blue bottles buzzed about the wall, and a little old mouse picked over the rubbish among the jam pots. I can tell you her name. She was called Thomasina Tittlemouse, a wood mouse with a long tail. And there she is. She looks rather lovely, doesn't she? With that long tail. Thomasina, that's a very posh name. She rustled across the paper bag and awakened Benjamin Bunny. The mouse apologized profusely, so she apologized a lot, and said that she knew Peter Rabbit. While she and Benjamin were talking, close under the wall they heard a heavy tread above their heads, and suddenly Mr. McGregor emptied out a sackful of lawn mowings right upon the top of the sleeping Flopsy Bunnies. Benjamin shrank down under his paper bag. The mouse hid in a jam pot. The little rabbits smiled sweetly in their sleep under the shower of grass. They did not awake because the lettuces had been so soporific. They dreamt that their mother Flopsy was tucking them up in a hay bed. Mr. McGregor looked down after emptying his sack. He saw some funny little brown tips of ears sticking up through the lawn mowings. He stared at them for some time. You can just see his feet. And the bunnies are under all that grass. Presently, a fly settled on one of them and it moved. Mr. McGregor climbed down onto the rubbish heap. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 little rabbits, he said as he dropped them into his sack. The Flopsy bunnies dreamt that their mother was turning them over in bed. They stirred a little in their sleep, but still they did not wake up. Oh, dear. Mr. McGregor's got them. What's he going to do? Mr. McGregor tied up the sack and left it on the wall. He went to put away the mowing machine. While he was gone, Mrs. Flopsy Bunny, who had remained at home, came across the field. She looked suspiciously at the sack and wondered where everybody was. It was a good job she was awake and had stayed at home. Then the mouse came out of her jam pot, and Benjamin took the paper bag off his head, and they told a doleful tale. Benjamin and Flopsy were in despair. They could not undo the string. But Mrs. Tittlemaus was a resourceful person. She nibbled a hole in the bottom of the corner of the sack. Oh, well done. The little rabbits were pulled out and pinched to wake them. Their parents stuffed the empty sack with 3 rotten vegetable marrows, an old blacking brush and 2 decayed turnips. Oh, look, there they are. They've all escaped. That's good. Then they all hid under a bush and watched for Mr. McGregor. There they are hidden. You can see their eyes and ears. Mr. McGregor came back and picked up the sack and carried it off. He carried it hanging down, as if it were rather heavy. The Flopsy bunnies followed at a safe distance. So there he is, look, walking up his garden path with the bunnies in the behind him. They watched him go into his house, and then they crept up to the window to listen. Mr. McGregor threw down the sack on the stone floor in a way that would have been extremely painful to the Flopsy bunnies if they had happened to have been inside it. They could hear him drag his chair on the flags and chuckle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 little rabbits, said Mr. McGregor. So they were watching to see what he was doing. Eh? What's that? What have they been spoiling now? Inquired Mrs. McGregor. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 little fat rabbits, replied Mr. McGregor, counting on his fingers. 1, 2, 3. Don't be silly. What do you mean, you silly old man? In the sack. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, replied Mr. McGregor. The youngest, Flopsy Bunny, got upon the window sill. There, look, they're all watching outside the window and listening. Mrs. McGregor took hold of the sack and felt it. She said she could feel 6, but they must be old rabbits because they were so hard in all different shapes. Not fit to eat, but the skins will do fine to line my old cloak. Line your own cloak? Shouted Mr. McGregor. I shall sell them and buy myself baccy. Rabbit tobacco, I shall skin them and cut off their heads. There, look. Mrs. McGregor untied the sack and put her hand inside. When she felt the vegetables, she became very angry. She said that Mr. McGregor had done it on purpose. And the rabbits were all listening to this. And Mr. McGregor was very angry too. One of the rotten marrows came flying through the kitchen window and hit the youngest Flopsy Bunny. It was rather hurt. Oh dear. He was cross, wasn't he? Then Benjamin and Flopsy thought that it was time to go home. I bet they did. Get out of the way quickly. So Mr. McGregor did not get his tobacco, and Mrs. McGregor did not get her rabbit skins. But next Christmas, Thomasina Tittlemouse got a present of enough rabbit wool to make herself a cloak and a hood and a handsome muff and a pair of warm mittens. Oh, she looks beautiful in that. Yes, she is. The end. And that's the end of our story time today. See you again soon. Bye.